Trump wants the Panama Canal. Just empty talk or a real threat for Hong Kong? Panama has rejected President-elect's threats, but Hong Kong and mainland Chinese companies have much at stake. President-elect Donald Trump's threat to retake the Panama Canal to safeguard U.S. national security has raised questions about the possible impact on Hong Kong and mainland Chinese companies operating there. CK Hutchison Holdings, founded by Hong Kong tycoon Li Ka-shing, is a major player as its subsidiary, Hutchison Ports PPC, has operated 2 ports at either end of the canal since 1997. Like other Chinese firms with projects there, it would be severely affected if Trump went ahead with his threat to take control of the canal, analysts said. Do you have questions about the biggest topics and trends from around the world? Get the answers with SCMP Knowledge, our new platform of curated content. With explainers, FAQs, analyses, and infographics brought to you by our award-winning team. He has repeatedly mentioned his desire for the U.S. to take control of the canal and Greenland, an autonomous Danish territory. On Wednesday, he did not rule out using military force or economic pressure to claim both. Trump has complained that Panama charges U.S. vessels exorbitant prices and alleged Chinese influence over the strategic waterway. International relations expert Wilson Chan Wai-shun said American politicians had complained about Hutchison Port's presence in Panama from as long ago as the early 1990s, accusing it of enabling Chinese control of the canal. If the incoming Trump administration managed to pressure Panama to scrap the 25-year concession with Hutchison Ports, the impact on Hong Kong businesses globally would be substantial, he warned. The termination will send a message to the world that the U.S. views strategic locations operated by Hong Kong as effectively under the control of Beijing, said Chan, co-founder of the Pagoda Institute, a nonprofit dedicated to fostering ties between the city and Europe. If other countries took their lead from the U.S., he added, Hong Kong businesses would find it hard to make infrastructure investments in other Western countries, crippling the city's ability to expand international ties. Noting how Tycoon Lee had invested in the European telecommunications industry in the past, he said, this will become impossible if they equate Hong Kong companies with those of mainland China. The 82-kilometer, 51 miles Panama Canal was built by the U.S. at the beginning of the 20th century, saving ships from having to travel 13,000 kilometers around the tip of South America to go between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It was controlled by the U.S. first, before being run jointly with Panama until 1999, when it was handed over to Panamanian authorities under the terms of an agreement struck by President Jimmy Carter during his tenure from 1977 to 1981. The U.S. is the canal's biggest customer, followed by China, and more than 2/5 of consumer goods traded last year between Northeast Asia and the U.S. East Coast went through the waterway. Trump, who will be sworn in for a second term on January 20th, has not let up on repeating that the U.S. should reclaim control of the canal, although the Panamanian government has dismissed his threat. Last week, Canal Administrator Ricarte Vasquez rejected Trump's claims, denying that China controlled the waterway's operations. He said it would remain in Panamanian control and stay open to all countries, adding that making exceptions for the U.S. would lead to chaos. Think tank consultant Lau Su-kai was not convinced Trump would carry out his threat, as it would look bad and upset U.S. relations with Latin American countries if he disregarded the authority of Panama so blatantly. It will also further aggravate U.S.-China relations, as all Chinese and Hong Kong firms there will be forced to move out, he said. At most, the U.S. may succeed in getting Panama to make some concessions. If this affects the interests of Chinese and Hong Kong firms who will be willing to invest in the canal. Given the worsening U.S.-Sino relations, Lau added, Trump was probably worried that American vessels using the canal might be blocked by China with its heavy influence there. Among the Chinese firms with a heavy presence is the Landbridge Group. Through a $900 million deal in 2016, it acquired control of Margarita Island, Panama's largest port on the Atlantic side, and in the Colón Free Trade Zone, the largest free trade zone in the Western Hemisphere. The deal established the Panama Colón Container Port as a deep water port for megaships. In 2018, a Chinese consortium led by the China Harbor Engineering Company and the China Communications Construction Company was awarded a U.S. $1.4 billion contract to build the canal's 4th bridge. Chinese firms have also invested heavily in energy-related facilities along the canal. On Thursday, Hutchison Ports said it would not comment on matters related to the canal, but in 1999, amid swirling talk in the U.S. about Chinese influence, Tycoon Lee dismissed suggestions that his Hutchison Whampoa would control the canal. "We cannot possibly control the canal," he said. "We are only an operator of container ports there." He made clear that the container ports were for loading, unloading, and storing cargo, and had no role in operating the canal. Then, President Bill Clinton said at the time that he did not expect any adverse consequences from the Chinese running the canal. Veteran China watcher Johnny Lau Yui-Siu was not convinced that the current Panama Canal saga would have an impact on mainland or Hong Kong businesses. The canal claim is a reflection of Trump's so-called America First doctrine, as he makes some empty talk to fulfill his campaign promises and secure the support of the American people, he said. Skeptical that Hutchison Ports might lose its concession, he said most of C.K. Hutchison's investments were overseas, and perhaps Hutchison's relationships with the U.S. are not that bad. Lau said the biggest threat to Hong Kong was the inevitable trade war between Beijing and Washington, and the city's 3 trade offices in the U.S. were at high risk, as the U.S. Congress was keen to strip them of their partial diplomatic privileges. He felt the heat generated by Trump's remarks about the Panama Canal and Greenland, alongside repercussions from clashes between his administration and other traditional U.S. allies, might in fact give Beijing some breathing room. Precisely because he is hurting the interests of his own allies during this time, China can take advantage of this moment to speed up efforts in repairing relationships with U.S. allies that were damaged in the past, he said.